to work well, then we need the items will, number one, be populated on our forms, as we saw when we entered some of these forms, invoices and the sales receipt. So if I enter an invoice, for example, you will see the items down here. So here's where the items are. Now we want this as clear as possible, so someone, again, that doesn't have a lot of knowledge can still create an invoice or sales receipt easily, because they can just populate the items, which has everything already in there. What is already in there? Well, it knows whether it's taxable or not. So that means we have to deal with sales tax. The item is the main thing that determines the sales tax. Now, in the United States, remember that bookkeeping is the same. It's universal in that the double entry accounting system is the double entry accounting system. However, the differences happen with laws and regulations, and of course, tax law is going to be the biggest one. So in the United States, we have an income tax for the federal government, and then the state can tax however they want. So they might have a sales tax on the state side with it, which is a type of consumption tax. Some places in Europe or in other areas of the world possibly will have their main system as a consumption tax. Those are the two main kind of tax systems, oftentimes consumption and an income tax. So that's going to be, this is going to be the consumption tax, which it's going to determine, and it knows what to charge based on the item, even though it's not populating it right here, but it's kind of annoying, but we won't deal with that right now. But it knows it's charging the tax. So that's a foundational item. It also knows the rate for what we're charging for. So even if it was hourly service, a service item, it gives us the rate. And if we're tracking the inventory within the system, then it's going to give us the items of inventory. Now, this is the other big one, tracking inventory, remembering that if you deal with inventory, you have to determine, do you want the inventory to be tracked within QuickBooks on a perpetual method or not? And there's many reasons why you might not. For example, if you have a Shopify store or Amazon or something, you might be tracking the inventory on the Shopify store or some other software in physical units. And therefore, might be tedious to pull that information also into the QuickBooks system. So in that case, you might just use a periodic inventory system, adjusting QuickBooks periodically at the end of the night, week, month, year, in order to at least get the tax returns to populate properly so you can record the proper amount of cost of goods sold and inventory for it. So you can, but you might be tracking within the system. And if you track the inventory within the system, tracking units as well as the cost, then when you sell the inventory, it's also going to record the reduction dollar amount of inventory as well as the reduction in units of inventory on the subledger. And it's going to record the related cost of goods sold on the income statement. So that means that when we set up our items here, I'm going to say, do you want to leave without saving? Yeah. We're going to say when we set up our items, what we have to do is include whether it's subject to sales tax or not. And then we're also going to have to include the sales price. If it's a service item, that's all we're going to have is the sales price. And then we're also going to have to include, if there's inventory involved, how much do we purchase the item for? Because it's going to have to use some kind of flow assumption for the cost of inventory, because the cost of inventory might change over time for a particular unit. The typical flow assumptions are like FIFO and weighted average. And then so it's going to have that. And then it's going to have, the sales price of the inventory. So we need to have all of that in our items. And then we can also make subcategories for the items so that we can list out the items a little bit more clearly. And that's the general idea with the items. So we'll get a lot more practice with the items in the second half of the course when we start a new company file, because that is when we will create the items from scratch, create the entire item list from scratch, adding both service items and the inventory items. So that's the general overview with the items.